After 3 years of marriage, Sean developed feelings for a college student, and their relationship became deeply passionate. Meanwhile, I maintained my facade as a kind and supportive affluent wife, even subtly covering for him in front of our parents. However, everything changed when Sean caught me at a club, seated on a male model's lap and sharing a fervent kiss. Enraged, Sean caused a commotion at the venue. The woman Sean had been seeing on the side grew increasingly impatient. She secretly entered our mansion without Sean's knowledge, seeking approval from his grandfather. The grandfather was livid. To defuse the situation, Sean and I collaborated to orchestrate a scene and safely escorted her out. As we exited the mansion's grand gates, the woman, tearful, grabbed Sean's sleeve and pleaded, "Sean, I'm not with you for your money." Moved, Sean gently comforted her, understanding why he was so drawn to her. The grandfather and Sean's parents' demeanor made her realize the significant differences between her and Sean's family. Desperate, she explained her feelings earnestly. Sean frowned slightly, unable to blame her, and tenderly patted her head, saying, "Stop crying, I get it." Then, noticing I might still be frightened, he hesitated before adding, "I'll take her home first. What about you?" Since I had entered in Sean's car, I couldn't return with him as he was now with his new interest. I smiled and took the initiative. "I'll just call a cab later," which seemed to please Sean, showing appreciation for my composure. He nodded, embraced the girl, and walked away without looking back. Unbeknownst to him, our mansion was situated on prime real estate occupied by the elite, making it impossible to hail a cab. Sean didn't return home until the next evening, bearing a few dark strawberry marks on his neck. Clearly, he had strategically placed them where his collar couldn't hide them, as if claiming ownership. Childish tactics suited only for the shallow-minded. I looked down, pretending not to notice, and gracefully took his coat like a devoted and virtuous wife. I even inquired about his lover. "How is she?" Sean loosened his collar and nonchalantly replied, "She'll be fine once I calm her down." After a moment of hesitation, I decided to express my long-held thoughts. "Have you ever considered giving her a proper status?" Sean froze, disbelief etched on his face. After a brief pause, he responded confusedly, "What do you mean?" "What I mean is, Sean, let's get divorced. I don't want to continue this act of being a devoted wife." It was clear he had never contemplated divorce. He rubbed his forehead with his hand, his once charming face now tense. "Stella, you must understand that divorce isn't simple for us." His tone tried to remain calm and composed, but in the past, this meant he wanted to drop the subject and for me to back off. This time, however, I was resolute in seeking a divorce. Our marriage of convenience involved not just us, but our families, complicating matters further. I bit my lip and pressed on. "It might be troublesome, but—" He abruptly interrupted, pulling me into his arms. "I've neglected you lately. I'll change. Don't bring up divorce again." "Stella, it seems like we haven't—" He lowered his head, his slightly pouty lips nearing mine. I quickly covered his mouth with my hand, making an excuse. "I'm on my period. Not a good time." With the divorce conversation stalled, I swiftly packed my belongings and left the house. Sean believed I was acting out of jealousy, bombarding me with calls and messages. In reality, I was concerned about his entanglements with others. Initially, any hint of scandal involving him upset me deeply, but after numerous incidents, I grew accustomed to it. My intense love for him had waned through repetitive behavior, though I didn't mind his misunderstandings. It allowed me to use his credit cards freely, a small compensation for his betrayal. A week after moving out, my best friend Coco and I visited an upscale leisure club, all expenses paid by Sean. Upon arrival, we encountered the woman in a uniform carrying a fruit platter. "You?" I cleared my throat and asked, "What are you doing here?" She looked at me with resentful, beautiful eyes. Coco examined her closely and said, "Is this the extra Sean keeps? Why is she working here if Sean isn't supporting her? Did he make her work here?" The woman's tray shook slightly, resembling an angry cat. "Sean and I are together because we love each other, not for his money," she continued, blaming me. "He's only with you for the family's benefits. I waved dismissively. Got it. Wish you happiness. And ignored her as I entered the private room with Coco. Inside, Coco chuckled. Where did Sean find this beauty? She's having an affair with a married man of his status. Does she think she can make it with her background? She might as well enjoy her youth. I smirked. That's why they say youth is valuable. For people like us with old money, we value legacy over wealth, so we're particularly cautious about marriage. Whether the marriage had exceptional conditions with high social status or was a family union, Sean wasn't foolish enough to give up everything for her, nor did he agree to the divorce. I suggested, and Coco added, I heard that girl has been stirring things up with Sean lately. Seems she's unhappy that you took away most of his attention when you left. The social circle is so tight, it's hard to keep secrets. I gave her a look. You're quite nosy. I have to admit, using the money from my unfaithful husband to support a male model is quite satisfying, especially when he's handsome, charming, and in great shape. It would be even better if Sean didn't catch us. When Sean barged in, I was straddling the male model I'd been eyeing for 2 days, hugging his neck and kissing his face. I was dressed provocatively with glamorous makeup, big wavy hair, and a revealing outfit. Hearing the noise, I instinctively turned toward the source. Before my flirtatious expression could fade, I saw Sean's face filled with hostility. I kissed the male model's lips again before reluctantly getting off him. Sean's face was dark with anger, and his glare at the male model was so fierce it seemed he wanted to tear him apart. I ran my fingers through my hair and broke the silence. First, what brings you here? Through gritted teeth, he spoke slowly and deeply. Stella, how dare you? What's there to not dare? You do your thing, I'll do mine. The more I spoke, the more guilty I felt. Being fair was important. I didn't make a scene, even though he kept a mistress on the side. Not because I felt guilty about being caught with a male escort, but simply because I was using his money to cheat on him. Sean, why are you here? I've been looking for you in the VIP lounge. Linda, I've brought her to you. I'm really sorry. I didn't know she was yours. I glanced to the side and saw a plump man leading a girl towards us, so her name was Linda. Sean stood still, not even acknowledging Linda. Meanwhile, Linda, like a loving swallow returning to the nest, threw herself into his arms, sobbing, Honey, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have acted out with you, and I shouldn't have secretly come to work. After speaking, her eyes followed Sean's gaze. She pressed her lips, nestled into his arms, and softly called out, Honey. A mistress openly referring to me as her husband in front of his wife felt like a blatant provocation. I didn't care. I just found it somewhat repulsive. The plump man who had approached us seemed to be the one suffering the most. Although I wasn't acquainted with him, he appeared to recognize me. He glanced first at me, then at the disheveled male model standing next to me, and finally at Sean and his companion in his arms, both wearing serious expressions. Within just 60 seconds, his facial expressions shifted more than 10 times. In families that form business alliances, it's common for spouses to pursue their own interests as long as things don't escalate. They often choose not to interfere to maintain a facade of peace, even if it means presenting a false image. Without any shame, Linda held tightly onto Sean's back. He attempted to calm her down. Let the driver take you home first. I have something to handle here. Speaking softly, Linda agreed and slowly withdrew from Sean's embrace. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment before she casually asked, Are you handling Stella's issue? A few days after I started here, I met Stella and her friend and heard they ordered the 5 most expensive items that day. I was worried it might cause tension between you, so I didn't dare tell you. Girls can be so cruel, I clicked my tongue. Sean clenched his fist by his side, his gaze shifting towards Linda and Nguyen's residence. I told you to leave first. Don't you understand? Maybe you're not used to being treated this way. Linda pouted and glared at him, tears threatening to spill, looking like a child seeking comfort. However, Sean wasn't in the mood for childish emotional games. For the first time, he lost his temper with the woman he once cherished. Get out! Linda ran off in tears. Sean, with a stern expression, walked over to the sofa where I was sitting with the male model, and sat down heavily. "Bring me everything my wife has ordered." He gritted his teeth, avoiding the term male model. The manager wiped his sweat and nodded with a bow. As soon as he left, Sean slammed the crystal glass onto the table. "You're something else, Stella." He removed his suit jacket and tossed it at me. The oversized garment covered my head, and I could still faintly smell the perfume Linda had left on it. I pulled it down, intending to return it, but he frowned, scanning me from head to toe before his gaze settled on my long white legs beneath the mini skirt. "Put it on. Don't ever go out dressed like this again." I hadn't realized how possessive he was. Calmly, I tucked the clothes away and met his eyes directly. "Sean, let's divorce. I'm truly fed up." Sean, who had been holding himself back, exploded with emotion after I spoke. His eyes were red as he kicked the table in front of him. "Haven't I told you never to mention those 2 words again?" I sighed, trying to stay calm. "You don't love me, so why force this relationship? Neither of us is happy this way." Sean was momentarily stunned before pointing at the male model who had been quietly standing beside him. His voice, rough as if sandpapered, was filled with disdain. "Not happy? You're happy hanging out with this unrefined scum?" The male model raised an eyebrow and replied, "Are you not clear on whether she's happy or not? Just think about it. When you spend time with that unrefined scum, you're keeping an eye on her." Quietly, he gave Sean a thumbs up. He was a warrior. When Coco brought in a group of male models, Sean had already turned the private room into chaos. The plump man's face trembled as he cautiously observed the warrior amidst the wreckage. "Sean, what's going on?" Sean threw the cigarette he was holding to the ground, stomped on it a few times, and said nonchalantly, "We'll assess the losses later. Report to our company's finance department." With a faint smirk, he glanced at the dozens of handsome male models. "I didn't realize you had such a large appetite." I silently rolled my eyes as Sean pulled out a bank card and tossed it onto the distorted table. "There's $5 million in there. You all take turns slapping each other. Whoever makes the loudest noise gets the money." I glared at him angrily. "Sean, are you out of your mind? You're humiliating people." As I finished speaking, a series of sharp sounds echoed behind me. Sean's mocking expression deepened. "Looks like they're enjoying being humiliated by me." I stiffly turned around to see that the people the manager had brought were already fighting, except for the warrior who had earlier stood up to Sean, still defiantly standing aside. He had truly met my expectations so far. Sean, uninterested in their antics, grabbed my arm to lead me away, but was stopped by the warrior observing the scene. "Squinting," Sean said to him, "know your place. You're nothing but lowly entertainment for people. Get lost." I frowned in dissatisfaction. "Sean, can't you speak more nicely?" Unexpectedly, I was defending someone, and Sean's grip on my arm tightened. "You better shut up and come back with me obediently, or I can't guarantee what I'll do later." The handsome face of the warrior darkened, indicating a storm was brewing. Fearing they might start fighting, I quickly shook my head at him. After all, I was still Sean's legal wife for now, and given Sean's social status, handling a small male model would be easy. I didn't want to cause trouble for anyone. As we left the club, Sean hailed a car, tossed me into the back seat, and followed. Silence filled the air. Once home, he immediately locked the door, took out his phone, and made a call. "Bring more people and destroy that club for me. There's a guy named Blank." He looked at me, and I quickly shook my head. It wasn't that I didn't want to tell him the warrior's name, but I genuinely didn't know. I was just there to have a good time. "Why should I need to know the guy's name? Go find the manager. He knows who it is. Smash the place and then find the kid and cripple his hand." Sean had a bit of a temper problem, which I was aware of, but he usually had exceptional self-control, so I rarely saw him lose his composure. I never imagined he could be so ruthless. "He's innocent, Sean. You can't do this." He stood up and pressed me down, his beautiful eyes filled with twisted blood vessels. "He dares to set his sights on you, so he's not innocent. Stella, be a good girl. Don't plead with him for me. Otherwise, what I want may not be limited to one of his hands. Eventually, someone innocent got involved because of me. Trying to push him off, he grabbed me and pinned me against the headboard. "Has he touched you?" he whispered in my ear. I kicked at him with my legs, but he held them down. I glared back. No, they don't offer that service. They can tease and flirt but never go all the way, which is quite enticing. Understanding my point, he chuckled as his expression softened. "You're cute when you're pouting." Holding my hands, he used one hand to pinch my cheeks. "These past few days have been ridiculous. Let's put this aside and move forward, okay?" It seemed like he was trying to sweet-talk me. "Fine. I'll let you off the hook if you break up with that college student." Sean fell silent for a few seconds before releasing me and sitting up straight. Irritated, he scratched his head. "You know she can't threaten your position. If you really don't like her, I won't let her appear in front of you again." In other words, he was unwilling to break up. I nodded, indicating my understanding. Thankfully, I hadn't liked him for a long time, otherwise my heart would be aching right now. Sean and I had a marriage of convenience, but were also childhood sweethearts. I had secretly loved him for many years. We had a honeymoon phase for over a year after marriage, until one time he was caught on camera entering a hotel with a certain female celebrity while drunk. I cried upon returning home. My mom sat quietly beside me, waiting until I finished crying before handing me a stack of tissues. "Stella, marital bliss is a luxury for our kind of family. While I hope you two are deeply in love and committed to each other, the situation has come to this. You need to come to terms with it sooner." Believing he had eased my feelings, Sean attempted to run his fingers through my hair, but I avoided him. "Stella, don't be so stubborn. You've always been the sensible one, haven't you?" At first, I acted sensibly because I liked him, but later it stemmed from indifference. My nature was never particularly gentle. However, our family required a cultured and dignified young woman, while Sean's family expected a courteous, gentle, and prudent daughter-in-law. For over 2 decades, maintaining this facade was draining. Looking up at him, I braced myself for another discussion about divorce. Sean's phone rang. Perhaps to irritate me, he answered it on speaker. "Sean, as you instructed, the club has been destroyed to incapacitate his hand. It might be somewhat complicated. It's handled by someone who just left the Smiths. I believe he's one of the top executives at the club and the Smiths' grandson. His name appears to be Ken. No surprise I encountered him near the villa last time. It's not that the car is bad, but the villa is located in Jin Chang's most affluent area, where vehicles typically start at tens of millions. Later, when I saw him at the club, I naturally assumed he was visiting a wealthy woman. In hindsight, he probably should have just left the Smiths' residence that day. I secretly felt relieved because his background isn't straightforward, making it difficult for Sean to mess with him easily. The burden of guilt in my heart eased significantly. Sean believed that destroying a club was merely a form of compensation. He had substantial wealth and the status of an old money heir, ensuring that no one would dare disrespect him. However, the real boss behind the club was another potential heir who had recently had a falling out with him. Within hours, the news broke that the group's general manager had demolished a high-end club in a fit of rage over a mistress, quickly making headlines. The report even included surveillance footage showing Linda in her work uniform, throwing herself into Sean's arms and calling him husband. Ken personally sent the video. Before this, we were unaware that Linda was Sean's girlfriend, and there was no disrespect towards her. Regarding the incident of sending someone to destroy the shop, we hope Sean can provide a reasonable explanation. Sean is married, which wasn't a secret. Since Linda dared to approach his grandfather for a position, she naturally wasn't subtle. Her true identity and social media accounts were soon uncovered, and her previous displays of affection were now viewed negatively. Although the hot search was quickly removed, too many people had already seen it, turning it into a significant scandal. We were summoned back to the villa once more. Grandpa sat in a chair with a cane, shaking with anger. Sean's father stood beside him, patting Grandpa's back to soothe him. Upon seeing Sean, Grandpa immediately turned hostile. "You ungrateful child! Why aren't you kneeling down?" Realizing his mistake, Sean pressed his lips together, remaining silent before kneeling before Grandpa. Didn't you say last time that girl was just a bartender? Did she pursue Sean because he has money? How did she become his mistress now? And that girl from the Smiths, every time we return, your grandfather needs to stay in the hospital for a few days? She's nothing but trouble. Why did you destroy his shop? Grandpa would scold and tap Sean's body with his cane. That's not it, Grandpa. I destroyed his shop because… Sean stopped mid-sentence, closed his mouth, and held his head high before lowering it again. Grandpa tapped him a few more times until he couldn't say anything else, then looked at me. Stella, tell Grandpa what really happened. I glanced at Sean, who was staring at the ground silently, and followed his lead, lowering my head like an ostrich with its beak shut. How could I explain? Should I reveal that it all began when your grandson caught me with a male model? As Grandpa continued to scold, Sean's phone kept ringing. I guessed it might be Linda. With her true identity exposed, her days must be difficult. As soon as he left the old mansion, Sean immediately called back. Although his voice was strained, a hint of tenderness was present. Don't be afraid. I'm coming to see you now. Stop crying and wait for me. Luckily, I learned my lesson and drove here myself this time, or I would have been left behind again. Linda is emotionally unstable now. I need to see her first. Sean looked at me, wanting to say something. I nodded and calmly replied, You go. I hold no grudges against her except for her flaunting how good Sean is to her. She hasn't actually hurt me. The main responsibility for the affair lies with Sean. Instead of going straight home, I drove to the company. In recent years, most of the family's businesses had been managed by my brother. He knew about my decision to divorce and asked, Have you made up your mind? Even setting aside property division, divorce involves cooperation between both families. The education I received since childhood taught me that family interests outweigh personal ones. Old money, like a sturdy ancient tree, not only has a main trunk but also extended branches that constantly watch us, always wanting to take over. But a lifetime is so long. I understand, brother. I'm sorry. My brother was silent for a moment before gently patting my head. If you want to leave, then leave. Our family doesn't depend on a daughter's marriage to sustain it. Due to the shop destruction incident, Sean's family stocks had slightly declined, and Linda was causing significant trouble. Sean didn't return home until a few days later. I presented the divorce agreement to him. Take a look and sign it if there are no issues. Sean picked it up and threw it in the trash. Stella, can you not argue with me right now? I'm tired. Let me rest for a bit. He tried to embrace me while saying this. I pushed him away and calmly stated, In all these years of marriage, when have I ever argued with you? If you sign it, we can part amicably. If you don't, we'll go through legal proceedings. Sean looked at me intensely, likely sensing my firm stance, and panicked. Do we have to be so decisive? Stella, I don't want to divorce you. Can't we not get a divorce? I cut ties with her as you requested, and you promised we would live well once I cut those ties. He shook his head. It's too late. To prevent the divorce, Sean moved directly into the company. However, every day he would send me good morning and good night messages, share daily updates, and offer gifts as if they were free. Perhaps he was using the same tactics he used on Linda with me. When he shared the coffee he had today, I couldn't help but respond, Sean, aren't you tired of this? You don't love me, so why bother? The message was sent successfully, and the chat box finally went silent. These days, even though I never replied to him, he would still talk to himself. Early the next morning, Sean hesitantly sent me a good morning message. I thought all night and realized, I do love you, Stella. I'm sorry. Can you give me one more chance? It seemed Sean had finally come to his senses. He even openly confessed his feelings for me on the company's official account. This move quickly attracted a wave of criticism from netizens. Stop pretending. It's disgusting to watch. Did the incident of destroying the shop for a mistress affect the company's revenue? Now you're trying to save face? He took all the blame for the cursing. Then he posted a very sincere apology, admitting his mistake, acknowledging that he realized it too late, and accepting criticism and supervision from everyone. I just wanted to save my marriage and my beloved. It felt like I was watching a farce. I asked my brother for the best lawyer, ready to file for divorce. The following day, Linda requested to meet at a cafe. Her eyes were puffy and red from crying, barely managing to stay open. Her once vibrant face appeared lifeless, with dry, peeling lips and a husky voice. "Please, can you return Sean to me? I really care for him. I'm begging you." Although her appearance evoked sympathy, it wasn't my concern. A mistress pleading with his legal wife to give back her husband. "You shouldn't have come to see me," she began, tears streaming as she blinked. "I have no other choice. He broke up with me, and when I tried to see him, he refused. Please help me. I can't live without him." I stood up, looking down at her sadly. "I'm sorry, I can't help you. We're getting a divorce." The light in her swollen eyes dimmed instantly. I gave a slight smile, turned, and walked away. She seemed lost in her own reality. I wished her the best. When I returned home, I unexpectedly found Sean in the living room. Raising my eyebrows, I asked, "What? Are you going back to divorce me?" He looked uneasy. "No," he replied. "There's a popular movie out lately, so I already bought tickets for us." "Are you trying to take me out on a date?" I asked. "No need. The only thing we need to discuss now is the divorce. I've already hired a lawyer. If you don't sign, we'll go to court in a few days." Sean sat in the shadows, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he asked, "Is divorce the only option?" "Yes," I responded. "Then can you give me one more month? We haven't gone on our honeymoon yet." I felt my eyebrows nodding. "Is that really necessary?" He was firm. "Yes." A month later, I agreed to sign willingly. Even if we went through the legal process, it would take years if I opposed it, right? It seemed like the best option. Noticing my hesitation, he added, "I can be flexible with the property division, but for this month we need to act like a normal couple." There was a hint of bitterness in his voice. "Let's treat this as our overdue honeymoon." He made a significant concession. Along with the property division I had proposed, he gave me 2 office buildings, 3 stores, and even 5% of the company's shares, considering he only owned 20% himself. With the property matters settled, Sean began organizing activities for the month. Excited like a naive young man in love, he asked me, "Stella, shall we go to an amusement park or the beach?" I lounged on the sofa, casually playing a game on my phone, and responded indifferently, "Don't you need to work?" "Everything is arranged, and the assistant will contact me if there's an emergency. This is my plan. Take a look at where you want to go." He handed me a paper filled with names, his bright eyes showing a mix of excitement and nervousness. 2 people on the verge of divorce pretending to have a genuine romance for a month, knowing that enduring it would allow us to divorce smoothly and for me to receive a substantial amount. I quietly endured and pointed casually. "Let's go to this one." I was pointing to the largest shopping mall. At some point, Sean had bought matching couple outfits, blushing as he asked me to change into them. I repeated to myself, divorce property, 10 times, and endured it again. We had a so-called couple's hot pot dinner and went to collect dolls. I was holding a bunch of stuffed animals, about to move to another room to play an escape game when I bumped into a burly man. "Watch it!" I looked up and met Ken's eyes, recognizing him, and recalling how I had sat on his lap and nibbled his ear before. It was inevitably awkward. Sean quickly pulled me away from Ken's embrace and shielded me behind him. Even without looking, I felt the tension between them. Ken was the first to speak, with a hint of sarcasm. "Sean is something else, getting 2 catches at home and outside." With a stiff posture, Sean responded somewhat sharply. "Ken is indeed interesting, as long as family matters aren't neglected. It seems you forgot what I said. Things that don't concern you, don't bother thinking about them, right?" Ken chuckled lightly. "In the end, who gets what is uncertain? Isn't that right, Sean?" Before expressing gratitude for Sean's generosity, I was considering redecorating the club, but was worried about the costs. Sean offered money to help. Because of Ken, Sean lost interest in continuing to engage. We decided to go home early. That Ken guy is definitely not a good person. Stella, keep your distance from him in the future. Indeed, today's Ken displayed two entirely different temperaments. Though I silently agreed, I didn't want to respond. Sean glanced at me slyly and changed the subject. How about going to the province in a few days or to the Maldives? For these 2 days, he had been talking cautiously to please me and avoid making me angry. I just said casually, whatever, it's just 1 month, endure it, and it will be over. In the end, we didn't go to the province or the Maldives because Stella was pregnant. She posted a photo of the pregnancy test with the caption, "Baby daddy doesn't want us, but it's okay. You still have mommy. Mommy will take good care of you." This news hit Sean like a bomb, breaking him into pieces. Both his official corporate account and personal account were flooded with insults. Isn't love supposed to be passionate and make you willing to do anything? How come you're kicking her out just because she's pregnant? Divorce was no longer just between us. The company's stock price plummeted, losing $2 billion in one night. Surprisingly, probably out of pity for me, people started buying products from our family's company in a buying spree. Even in their official messages advising rational consumption, they hinted at remarriage. But the remarriage was actually a divorce. Whether or not it was rational didn't matter. Just let the beautiful lady get a divorce, and we'd still continue buying. He couldn't wait for a month to sign the divorce agreement. Stella, after I sort all this out, can I still pursue you? I refused without hesitation. Let's maintain some dignity for each other. He turned away with a tear rolling down his eye. After the divorce, I packed my bags and left the country to travel the world. My brother drove me to the airport. Before going through security, he patted my shoulder and said, "Stella, I hope you can be yourself and not be confined anymore." Tears welled up in my eyes as I choked out, "Okay." I traveled to different countries, got tanned, and was happy. I could run wild, laugh out loud, lie in bed eating chips and binge-watch shows, or head to a roadside stall in slippers with messy hair, enjoying street food. Now, I wasn't the obedient daughter of a wealthy family before, nor was I Sean's caring wife. I was just Stella. Freedom was truly wonderful. I saw Sean many times, walking around the streets of London or on a boat in Venice, watching me from a distance. As long as he didn't interfere, I let him be. I heard he wasn't doing well. Because of Linda's issue, even Grandpa and other respected family elders were disappointed in him. Some suggested finding a replacement for him. Sean didn't say anything. He just immersed himself in cleaning up the mess. Family lineage was crucial, and even if a child was conceived with someone outside, it would still be taken care of. Maybe they would need it in the future. However, Linda couldn't keep the child. At 16 weeks pregnant, Sean took her for an amniocentesis. If it was his, it would be terminated. If not, it would not concern him. Fortunately, the child wasn't his. Later, Sean stepped down from the power center. He said, "I want to walk the path she once walked. Let him go, as none of it concerns me anymore." When I met Ken, I was watching the sunset on the Scottish coast. He approached me and casually sat beside me asking, "Stella, do you want to give it a try with me?" I tilted my head and replied, "Try what?" "Marriage? I think I'll pass. I'm beautiful and rich. I can live well on my own. Why should I trap myself in the cage of marriage again?" He pondered and said, "You can use my money to support male models." That was an open-minded suggestion. Smiling mischievously, I said, "No need. The assets from the divorce settlement will last me a lifetime." Sean and Ken were both chosen as heirs within their respective families, each embodying their own strengths. Ultimately, marriage wasn't essential. Who can argue that solitude and freedom can't bring joy? As the sun set, the sky blazed crimson, mirroring the shimmering ocean, while the sea breeze gently touched my face. It was the right decision. Sean's reflection after his divorce from Stella. I spent restless nights, unable to sleep, her image occupying my mind whenever I closed my eyes. I longed to catch even a fleeting glimpse of her, but it wasn't possible at the moment. My departure had significantly affected the company. leading to discontent among shareholders. The elders at home were keen to see me go. If I chose to leave, it would be my decision, not theirs. Then there was Linda. What initially drew me to her? Perhaps it was the way she stood at the school gate, books in hand, her white dress fluttering in the breeze, pure and beautiful, unlike Stella at that time. Stella also loved white dresses, gentle and kind. I drove to the small apartment I had purchased for Linda. The familiar surroundings brought back memories of our wild antics, making me feel unworthy. How could someone as flawed as me deserve Stella by my side? Linda greeted me happily, her hand resting on her flat stomach. "Are you here to see me and the baby?" My eyes fixed on her belly. "It's still early in the pregnancy. You should consider terminating it." Her smile vanished, and her eyes widened in shock. "What are you saying? This is your child." "My child," I replied. "Only Stella is meant to carry a child for me, though she can no longer." Her words made me question the paternity. Now, I had to decide whether to terminate the pregnancy or wait a few months for an amniocentesis. It was her choice. The baby seemed to be Linda's leverage to climb the social ladder. Once again, she sneaked into the old house without informing me, understanding the significance of an heir in our family. Stella and I had been married for 3 years without children, and our grandfather, despite his disapproval, intervened to ensure a child was born. "Let's wait a few months," he had said. "At 16 weeks, we'll do a DNA test. If it's mine, I have ways to handle it. I know it seems heartless, but what other options do I have? If she bears my child, Stella and I have no future." My insomnia worsened, and all I could see were images of Stella, her gentle smile, her reprimands, her tossing clothes around, and sitting quietly by the window with a book. I sought help from a psychiatrist, but the doctor said my troubled mind needed proper treatment, which was far away across the ocean. She refused to help me, leaving me to endure the agony of waiting. When the time came, I took Linda for an amniocentesis. The results showed the child wasn't mine. I broke down, crying uncontrollably. Stella, my Stella. I fought so hard. For a month, I hoped my efforts would rekindle our relationship. Even if it ended in divorce, we would at least have some sweet memories. But this child, which wasn't mine, was all Linda's fault. Holding a report in my hand, I stormed into Linda's small apartment, grabbing her by the neck and demanding answers. Linda resisted, hitting my arms, and said intermittently, "It wasn't you who approached me first, right? Sean, no one forced you to cheat." My grip loosened. No one made me cheat. I spent 6 months settling the company's affairs, and once everyone trusted me again, I resigned voluntarily. Lovesickness is too painful. I wanted to find her, even if it was just to watch her from afar, even if she wouldn't accept me anymore. As long as I could see her, I'd be content. Ken's reflection. I met Stella when I was 5. To give me the best education, my mother coldly sent me back to the Smiths. That was my first time at their home and meeting my grandparents. The Smiths' mansion was truly magnificent, even grander than the wealthiest family in town. As a young child, I felt out of place in such an elegant setting. Grandma held a teacup, tapping the lid against it repeatedly, disdainfully looking at us. "People from humble backgrounds can't handle high society," she thought. My father was a nobleman with a bright future, but he gave up his inheritance to follow my mother back to her less developed hometown. Grandpa and Grandma despised my mother, believing she had taken their son away after nurturing him for over 20 years. Naturally, they didn't like me either. However, being part of the Smith lineage was an unchangeable fact. Despite their dislike, Grandpa and Grandma accepted me, though acceptance didn't equate to kindness. They made me stand in the yard under the scorching sun if I dropped a grain of rice during lunch or made a noise while eating. They would confine me to a small house, forcing me to reflect on my actions on an empty stomach. Stella was like a little angel. She suddenly appeared at the Smiths, pulling my hand and acting sweet in front of Grandpa. "Grandpa, I want this little friend to play with me. Is that okay?" Who could refuse such a gentle and sweet girl? It was the first time I saw such kindness in Grandpa's expression. She led me to a shady spot, let go of my hand, and smiled brightly. "My name is Stella. What's yours?" I lowered my head, feeling shy. Stella tilted her head, leaned toward me, and blinked her large eyes. "Ken, you're really handsome." I didn't stay long at the Smiths, as my parents recalled me for breaking Grandpa's precious vase. Although a servant had actually broken it, they couldn't afford to replace it, so Stella blamed me instead. I tried to explain, but no one believed me. After that incident, I rarely returned to the Smiths and never saw Stella again. Occasionally, I would remember how she pulled me into the shade from the blazing sun. Later, I heard she married Sean. It didn't affect me much. We were too young when we first met for any love to develop. More than a decade later, after achieving success in my own business, even Grandpa, who had always looked down on me, had to admit I was more accomplished than he had expected. He called me back to discuss taking over the company. In this prestigious, multi-generational family, legitimate children and their abilities were highly valued. Honestly, I felt contempt, but for my mother's sake, I agreed. My mother was naive, dreaming of gaining Grandpa and Grandma's acceptance. Leaving, I saw her standing by the roadside. I couldn't recall her childhood appearance, but luckily Grandpa had shown me family photos spanning 3 generations. Almost by chance, I rolled down the car window and asked her to get in. She refused without hesitation, understandable since I was now a stranger to her. It would have been foolish for her to get into my car. Unexpectedly, I met Stella at a club. She was the epitome of elegance in high society, dressed like a mesmerizing fairy, fiery, yet enchanting. She noticed me too, pointing with graceful fingers. "He's the most handsome one." It seemed she mistook me for a male model. I looked down, adopted an innocent and obedient expression, and greeted her with a smile. It seemed intriguing. Sean was drawn in by my conversation. Someone contacted him, saying his mistress was working at the club. From what I discovered, he indulged that girl excessively and wouldn't let her work there. As expected, he showed up. I intentionally left the room door slightly open and had someone guide him inside. Sean was angrier than I had imagined. Naturally, any man would be furious seeing his wife betray him right before his eyes. I admit I wasn't a good person. I just wanted to create trouble. But when Sean tried to take her away, a voice in my head kept urging, "Get her back!" Perhaps I regretted bringing Sean here when Stella sat on me and kissed me passionately. I stood in their path, but she shook her head. "They are the legal couple, and I'm just a stranger. How can I talk about getting her back? She never belonged to me in the first place." I reviewed the surveillance footage and shared it with a news outlet. Regarding the vandalism at the store, no one dared to speak out. The mistress, likely kept in the dark, couldn't reveal much, even if many would believe her story. As expected, the situation escalated. Sean compensated for all the damages and included a message with the money. One should know their place and not desire what isn't theirs. I swept all the stationery off my desk to the floor. After venting, I couldn't deny that he was right. Saying I liked Stella might have been an exaggeration. I just found her intriguing. At least that's what I believed until I saw her and Sean in matching outfits. After the unpleasant incident at the mall, I returned home and smoked 2 packs of cigarettes. No matter how I thought about it, her outfit was too eye-catching. Since I couldn't stand their marital bliss, why not disrupt it? Didn't Sean say she didn't belong to me? Then I'd make her mine. With that determination, I asked Linda out. She wanted to climb the social ladder. Wasn't it simple? Just one child would suffice. A married tycoon cheating and getting the mistress pregnant, leveraging public opinion, their marriage would inevitably collapse. Whether Linda, being somewhat naive, could succeed in ascending socially with a child depended on her own capabilities. They divorced. I encountered Sean a few times at business events. He didn't seem to be thriving. I heard he was struggling with love. Linda failed in her pursuit of success with Sean, as the child she bore wasn't his. Upon hearing this, I simply smiled. Stella had finished her trip to England and was now in Scotland. Over the past few months, I had been tracking her movements and knew Sean had gone to find her. However, Sean seemed self-aware and didn't dare to bother her. "Get me a ticket for tomorrow to fly to Scotland. After all the time she's had to reflect, maybe she's ready to start a new relationship." Standing by the window, gazing at the distant blue sky and white clouds, I asked myself once more, do I love Stella? The answer was clear. Yes, I do.